One of the things about mindfulness is that the way that the way that we live our life and the way that we behave influences how mindful we are. And I'm assuming that everyone here has heard about mindfulness, yeah? And can someone share a definition of what they think mindfulness might be? Or maybe share a word or two? Yeah. So it is very much about being present. It's primarily about awareness. I define it as being awareness and acceptance of what we experience in the present moment. And when we're aware of what we're experiencing, we're actually accepting it, because we're holding it in our awareness. But when we escape from our experience, when we get lost in thought, which is the opposite of being mindful, that's when we're resisting the present moment, and that's when we're unskillful. So to be skillful and to have a peaceful mind, we need to be present and we need to be mindful. So there are these two modes of the mind. We're either present and mindful, or we're lost in thought. So as I said, there's this correlation between ethics and how you live and mindfulness. And a lot of mindfulness courses, if you was to attend them, not all of them, but a lot of them, they don't really cover off the ethics side of things. They might teach you how to meditate and explain what mindfulness is, and they might get you to eat a raisin or a piece of chocolate and really savour it and enjoy it, and all those kind of practices, and body scans and things like that. And they're all part of cultivating mindfulness, but we also need to look at our personal ethics as well, and that's what this second book is really focused on. The second book is called Living a Life of Harmony, 7 Guidelines to Cultivate Peace and Kindness. And it starts off by explaining that we're actually all part of a process. We're all part of an infinite process which is all connected together. So everything that we're doing is influencing something else, and other things are influencing us. Even now as I talk to you, I'm saying things, you're having maybe certain thoughts, certain responses or reactions to what I'm saying. At the back of this talk, things might change, or things will change for you and me as a result of what's happened here. So we're constantly interacting, and there's this big process that we're all a part of. Now, a lot of the time, what many of us believe, me included, is that actually we're separate and we're not part of the process. But actually we are part of the process, and we're all connected together, and that's just how it is. And there are lots of processes within the infinite process which are going on. So there was a process that you followed to come here today to the talk. There's a process that was followed this morning when you got out of bed and maybe nipped to the toilet, had your breakfast, etc. And there are processes that take place at different levels of detail. So at a really grand level, you could take the Earth, and the Earth is a process. It was created. It's going to be sustained for a while, and then ultimately, at some point in the future, it will be destroyed. And then inside the Earth, you know, if you look at your body and your existence, your form-based existence, you are a process. You know, you're a process going through life. You're created, you live, you change, and then your form dissolves and passes. That's how it works. And even down at an atomic level, there are processes taking place. So if we was to look at this singing bowl, for example, you might think, well, that's not really following a process. But if you was to look inside the singing bowl and down at an atomic level, you would see that all the atoms and things are vibrating around and bouncing off each other. So even at a granular level, there are processes taking place. And people that study quantum physics go into the atom and look even beyond the electrons and the particles and things, and are finding more processes even in that space. And it has an infinite depth to it. You know, the scientists can keep taking layer off and layer off, but ultimately you're never really going to reach the bottom. So this process has infinite scope, and it has infinite depth. Now, the reason that I wanted to explain this process thing to you is that behind the process lies intelligence. And this intelligence has certain guidance for human beings. So there are certain things that we can do as a human being which this process or the intelligence behind it likes, and there are certain things that if we do them, it doesn't like it. Now, if we do the things that align with the process, we find that our minds are more peaceful, that we're more mindful, and life's more harmonious. If we do the opposite to what the process is looking for to evolve, then that creates stress in the mind, and then we become lost in thought, and there are consequences associated with that. So there's this intelligence behind the process that in a way provides guidance for human beings. So what are some of the things, like for a human being, that work? Like general things, just give me an example. So if you want to live harmoniously as a human being, what are the kind of things that you need to do? Yeah. Honesty, generosity, be mindful. Yeah. Kindness, things like that. And it's interesting because these guidelines, they've always stood. There's always been certain things that work for human beings and certain things that don't, for hundreds and thousands of years. And if we look into religions and philosophies, spiritual philosophy, we find that there are lists and there are guidance offered through different religions and philosophies. So an example of a list might be, so a list for ethics from a religion or a philosophy. 10 Commandments, yeah, in Christianity. Anyone think of any others? So we've got things like we've got precepts in Buddhism, in yoga, we've got the yamas and niyamas, and we've got the 10 Commandments of the Quran as well. So religions and philosophies have these lists, and they've been providing them for a long time. So there's different levels of engagement that people have with these lists. Some people don't know anything about them. Some people have heard of them but can't recite them. Some people can recite them but don't practice them. And some people actually make following these guidelines a practice. And I was doing some research ahead of this talk, and I went onto Google and I found some research related to Christians in the US. And I wasn't looking specifically for Christians in the US, that's just what popped up when I searched in Google. And what it told me was that in 2018, 327 million people live in the US. And out of those 327 million people, 245 million of them are Christians, so 75%. I didn't realise. Anyway, this is what it says. And there was an article in Reuters Live, New York, and they asked the question, how many of the 10 Commandments can you name? So they did a survey of these Christians in America, or a number of them anyway, and put to the test, Americans, and I need to make sure I get this right, they recalled the 7 ingredients of a McDonald's Big Mac more easily than the Bible's 10 Commandments. An organisation, Kelton Research, I think this was the same organisation, they found 80% of 1,000 respondents, they could name the Big Mac's primary ingredient, which is 2 all-beef patties, or at least it was at the time, but less than 6 in 10 of these people knew the commandment, thou shalt not kill. And at the final bit, less than half of the respondents, so 45%, could recall the commandments, honour thy father and mother, but 62% knew that the Big Mac has pickle. So this article was called Americans Know Big Macs Better Than the 10 Commandments. So that's just a little example of even where you've got a religious population in a country, they don't necessarily understand or can recall or are practicing these lists that are offered. And the Ten Commandments in Christianity, very important list, just like the precepts are in Buddhism and the other lists that I talked about. Just quite interesting. And what I wanted to do with this book was produce a list of guidelines, ethical guidelines that were practical, that were straightforward, that were easy to follow. And I wanted them for myself so I could use them and memorize them. And I wanted them so that I could teach other people. Because I know that if you follow ethical guidelines, then your life does become more harmonious, your mind does become more peaceful, and life tends to flow much better. And you end up doing more good in the world. So for me, I thought it was an important thing to produce. And one of the reasons that I did it, because you might ask yourself, why did Darren do that when there's all these other lists and things available? And the reason that I did it is that a lot of these lists were produced hundreds of years ago in different contexts, and the culture was very different then. So if you was to look at these lists today, you may find it quite a challenge to be able to, one, understand them, and two, apply them in today's world. So what I wanted to do was take some of those lists and my own insights and come up with a synthesis of these guidelines that are easy to understand and that are relevant today and easy to apply today. And that's where the 7 guidelines came from. Yeah. So what I'd like to do now is just talk through the 7 guidelines with you very briefly, and we're going to have some time for questions at the end so we can explore them a little bit more then if you wish. So the first guideline is honour the body. Honour the body. So honouring the body is about looking after the body and keeping the body in as good a condition as you can, because your body is the vehicle which you've been provided with to take you through this process. So honour the body. And it's also about relationship with your body, because your body's not always going to be well, even if you do your best to try and look after it. So honouring the body is about having a good relationship with the body and being kind and accepting of yourself, regardless of how your body is at this point in time. So that's the first guideline, honour the body. Which leads me nicely onto the second guideline, which is to be present. Be present, bringing awareness and acceptance into every moment. So what I'm suggesting there is be mindful. Be in the present moment. If you find yourself lost in thought, come back to the present moment, because life's peaceful there. And when you're in the present moment and you're mindful, especially if you can open yourself up to that which transcends you, you're going to be very skillful, you're going to be very wise, you're going to be very kind through the present moment. So guideline number 2 I call King of the Guidelines, because if you can master that one, if you can be mindful or present, what you tend to find is that you follow the other guidelines automatically, because you just tend to do the right thing. But only when we're present and when we're here in the present moment. The opposite to being present or mindful is be with the fairies. That's a nice I've never heard it described that way, but yeah, I call it being lost in thought. And even when you're sat here listening to me, hopefully you're present and you're mindful and you're in the present moment, but occasionally I appreciate that you're going to get lost in thought and your mind will go off and it'll go into a dream, and then you come back again. And the same might happen to me as well. So if I start talking gibberish, I'm not making sense. Or if I say things that you think are unkind, it means I've got lost, and just give me a wink or something, and then I'll bring myself back into the present moment. Number 3, act with kindness. You find this in all the religious lists. Act with kindness. So act with kindness, considering everyone and everything. Now this is not act with kindness to everyone and everything, because it's not possible for us to do that. We have to prioritise. But what I'm encouraging here is then when we act, which is thoughts, speech, physical actions, if we can, take action based on the whole rather than on our own egoic, selfish needs. So yeah, kindness is really important. And the opposite to this one? Yeah, don't be nice, yeah. I've put here, there's no right answer by the way to this, but I've put be intentionally harmful, and I know I've done that a few times before, or single-minded in your actions. Yeah, so that's what we're trying to move away from towards kindness. Number 4 is about understanding the truth and communicating it selectively and skillfully. So understanding the truth is important because if we are deluded in our thinking, we suffer. So we try and understand the truth of our experience and the situation and what's going on. Now, I'm not suggesting that we understand everything, because that's not possible. But sometimes understanding the truth is saying to yourself, I don't know. The truth is, I don't know. And it's also about being smart in that you know the difference between facts and opinions. So when you're communicating, if it's an opinion you're communicating, you're aware that it's an opinion rather than believing that it's fact. And there's stuff in the book that helps with all this, how to do it. So there's understanding the truth, and then when we communicate, it's selective and skillful. And the reason I included selective is because I know for a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people find it difficult to know how much to communicate or when to communicate. And then the skillfulness is talking harmoniously, kindly, in a way that brings people together rather than divides them. Yeah, talking truthfully, all of that. So the opposite to understand the truth, communicating it selectively and skillfully. Now you have to take a break because you've answered the first 3.
I'm always ready.
You look like you have an answer. What's the opposite to understanding the truth, communicating it selectively and skillfully? Yeah, don't speak the truth, speak falsely, speak excessive, communicate excessively or unskillfully. Okay. So these next 2, these are really important because these are about simplicity. And I know that most people, including me, can relate to these. So number 5 is to do only what needs to be done. Do only what needs to be done. What that means is that we're mindful and we're conscious, and we just select and do the things that are required, and we don't do the things that aren't required. Now this is, it's explained more in the book, it's quite tricky to explain how to do that, but I'm sure that you will all know that there are certain activities and things that you do that actually you need to let go of. Yeah, so it's about letting go of those things, and then there are also things that we need to do that we're not doing. Important things. So it's about doing those. So it's about taking responsibility for activity. And for most people, not everyone, but for a lot of people, it actually means doing less. Usually that's the result, because a lot of people, they do far more than they need to, and then some people complain because they've not got time to do what they need to do. So it's all about taking responsibility for that. So the opposite to doing what needs to be done is, yeah, do what's unnecessary. Yeah. The 6th one is harmoniously obtain and retain only what you need. Harmoniously obtain and retain only what you need. So here, we're looking to just get the things that we need in life, but no more. And we only hang on to things that we need. So if we have stuff that we don't need, we let go of them. And this guideline is also about making sure that we do get the things that we need, whether they're assets or relationships, the general things in life that you need to put in place so your needs are met and that you're looking after yourself and taking responsibility for yourself. Yeah. So this relates very much to the guideline around doing only what needs to be done. Okay. So obtain and retain only what you need. The opposite to this one, in a word, you could say it's greed, or obtain or retain, or exploit people. Yeah, that's another way of looking at it. So the next one is 7. 7 is apply the guidelines to your digital device usage. So we've got these 6 guidelines. What we need to do is we need to take these and apply them to the digital realm, because we're spending more and more of our time these days on mobile phones, laptops, internet connected devices with screens. So all of these ethics and guidelines that I'm talking through with you need to be applied in that realm as well. So when you're using your device, you're doing it in a way where you're honouring the body, you're being mindful with your device, you're using it in a way that's kind, you're communicating truthfully and skillfully, etc. So there's a specific guideline on digital and conscious digital usage, and this is one of the things that differentiates this list to the others, because obviously you're not going to find that in some of the other lists that I mentioned, because at the time there wasn't mobile phones and the internet. Although if there was, I'm sure that the likes of Jesus and the Buddha would have been using their iPhones or whatever they was, tablets or whatever, mindfully. But yeah, I just think it's really important these days for us to focus on digital with our ethics. And we've got a lot of work to do. There was a report, a BBC News report last week. An international report has showed that England's schools had the worst problem with cyberbullying out of 48 countries. Yeah, which is shocking. So there's a real opportunity, I think, to be educating children and adults around using the digital devices consciously, and educating children around ethics. And I know we do that to an extent, but I think there's certainly a lot more that we. I'll just finish off by explaining some of the benefits that I've received by following these guidelines, because I always make it clear to people that I've written these guidelines and I've produced them and put them in a book, but I'm not like the perfect practitioner. Yeah, so I follow them and I do my best with them, and I'm on a journey. And it's like with mindfulness, I acknowledge to everyone that most of the time I'm lost in thought rather than being mindful. But it's work in progress. But what I have found through focusing on these, reciting them each day and practicing them, is that I've definitely become less materialistic. So I'm definitely happier with less stuff, and I'm finding I'm getting more space in my life, so there's not as much to do because I'm challenging what I'm doing and then making sure that I'm actually doing the things that I need to. My mind has been more peaceful, not just through the standard mindfulness practice and meditation and stuff like that, just because I've done some work to try and get my life a little bit more in shape and done some work on my personal ethics. So that's just naturally resulted in a more peaceful mind. It's allowed me to make decisions more confidently. There's a nice thing about this list when you understand it, is if you're faced, especially with a complex decision, you can go down these guidelines and use them to guide your decision and to guide the action that you take, especially if it's something important. I've experienced more spiritual connectivity as well, because when we're following the guidelines and the mind's peaceful, if we believe in spirit or God or whatever label you might want to give it, it's easier. Sorry. it's easier to be able to connect with that when you're mindful. When you're lost in thought, you're not going to be spiritual. Spirit's there, but our minds do need to be peaceful, and we need to be aware in order to allow it to flow through us. And then finally, the other thing that it's helped me with is just placing more focus on my digital skillness. So being more mindful about how much time I'm spending on my digital devices, being more mindful about trying to keep some awareness around my usage rather than getting lost in the content, especially social media. So that's how I've found the guidelines. I'm getting some good feedback by people that I teach, and also people that have read the book, that are practicing them, that they're getting some good benefits. And I just wanted to finish by saying that I believe that if everybody were to follow these guidelines or something similar, and if people were to practice something like this, including political leaders, could you imagine what a kinder, more peaceful, harmonious place the world would be. So this is my contribution towards kind of taking us to that vision, and hopefully, even if just a few people, read the book and practice the guidelines, and I practice them, we'll be doing our bits to try and bring about more peace and kindness in the world. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've certainly not really come up with these guidelines. What I've done is I've taken existing guidance from religions and philosophical teachings, added my own experience, and synthesized them in order to produce them. So yeah, I certainly don't believe that they're mine. The other question: do I believe that there's a divine? I think you called it a divine entity, higher entity, that provides guidance and intelligence for all of this stuff? Yes, I do. Yeah, it just is. Yeah, it's not one of those that I can explain, but I know it's there. Yeah, and I do believe. Yeah, and have faith in the divine entity. Yeah. Yeah, ourselves, and that we need to take responsibility. We need to think about what we're doing, and and follow some, whether it's guidelines like this or spiritual teachings, rather than just rely on a divine entity or God to be able to guide us. Because the problem is, a lot of the time, I know for me, I'm not really in touch with that divine entity or spirit because I'm lost in thought. If we was constantly connected, we wouldn't need the guidelines, because it'd just be flowing through us, and we'd just be doing all this stuff automatically. But I find it helpful. So I think for me, it's about kind of striking a balance between having faith that there is this higher consciousness there, or spirit, but also taking responsibility and studying and practicing and meditating and trying to help myself along the way. Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. List that you can follow. Yeah. On the way out, if you stop off at the table where I'll be and where the books are, I've got some business cards which have got the 7 guidelines on them. So you're welcome to take one of those. Be warned, you will need a magnifying glass to read them. Quite a small font. One of the guidelines should have been select an appropriate font, but they should be useful. The other thing you can do is you can go onto my website, mindfulnessonlinetraining.org. And there's various things that you can copy and paste there, and audio podcasts and other resources that you can use in addition to the book. Yeah, but yeah, it is helpful to have a list of these things. It can be quite good to recite them and to sit with them and to contemplate them. Whether it's my set of guidelines or whether it's one of the other ethical lists that I've mentioned, it's good to have them in an accessible form. Yeah. I find it a real challenge. I am lost in thought most of the time. But what I'm trying to do is put the practice in, because I find that helps. So like doing the meditation.
I sometimes chant the power of now.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
Not out in the snow, to myself. In the street.
Right.
Sometimes you can get us back into the sort of present moment.
Yeah. Do you do that in your head or out loud?
No, in my head.
In your head.
If I did that in the street, people would look at us just in my head.
I wonder if it works. Shall we try it?
Yes.
The power of now!
I do it quite a lot in the house. The power, I say it to myself.
Yeah.
Because the book sounds a trance-like effect on me.
Is
Yeah.
that what you say? Oh.
Well, I think if you can find a mantra like that which works for you, an anchor like that to bring you back into the present moment, whether it's something that you say to yourself, or whether it's a symbol, or a ritual or something, I think that's fantastic. So if that works for you, and I love that book, I think that's a good point you're making about being selective about where you go for your news, because that kind of links into understanding the truth. And also, I think with some news sources, as you say, there's a lot of emotion coming through, and that can impact you. So yeah, it is a challenge, because culturally, as soon as you walk out onto the street, and start taking in things from the media, a lot of the things that you'll be taking in will be pushing you against what we need to be doing.
That's when you start questioning yourself in your action.
Yeah, that's right. You have to take personal responsibility, and it is a challenge. It does sometimes feel like we're swimming against a current,
Yeah, I think
because we're
also
being
the-
encouraged to do what's unskillful rather than what's skillful. For most people that would practice mindfulness to help with that kind of stress and anxiety, if they've had a good teacher and they're practicing in the right way, it will have a tremendous, huge impact on reducing anxiety. Although that said, you have to take each individual case
Yeah.
on its own merits, really, with its own characteristics, because for some people, you know, a traditional formal mindfulness practice might not be the right thing for them at that point in time. But generally speaking, you know, if you can, if you do suffer with anxiety, and by the way, I've suffered with anxiety for most of my life, if I'm being honest, and I found mindfulness practice, and in particular meditation, extremely helpful and calming. So speaking from personal experience, it's transformed my anxiety levels. I mean, I still do struggle with it. I was struggling with it when I came here today, and the fact that I'm being filmed, and I struggle with it generally. But my anxiety levels have definitely reduced as a result of mindfulness practice. And if you look at the evidence that's out there, and the amount of mindfulness training programs which are benefiting people, you know, you'll find that for a lot of people, if they can do it, then it's definitely the right thing to do. So yeah, I certainly recommend that people look at it. That's a good question. So with mindfulness, you can use mindfulness for pain management. There's a really good book called Mindfulness for Health by Vidya Mala, and that works with the model that you can use mindfulness to in a way to separate your mind from the pain. So the pain can be there, but you're aware of the pain, but you don't get lost in it. So the pain's there, but the mind's peaceful, and that's what mindfulness can do for you. And often what that does is that helps sometimes with the physical pain and the physical condition as well. There's a really good organisation called Breathworks, and they specialise in all of that stuff.
Well, like actually,